First up is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and the last time I remember feeling this stressed out about doing a review and seeing a film was for Crazy Rich Asians, because there is so much pressure on Shang-Chi, and I feel it myself. I'm sure the filmmakers and everyone involved in the film felt it. There's just so much riding on this for multiple reasons. So there's the representation factor, there's the fact that this is really the kickoff of the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's, again, did I mention the representation factor? Mostly this comes down to that factor. So this is going to be a spoiler-free review, because 99.9% of my reviews are, but I just want to get that out of the way up front. I was so relieved and so happy to see this film. We've also been waiting so long for this. I actually trekked out to a theater for it. I've been very, very cautious about theaters. I've only seen 2 films in theaters in the last 18 months, and this had to be one of them. And I will say it was worth it. Normally I'm like, no, it's fine. You can see this on a small screen. No, just being immersed in the experience and feeling a sense of joy at being at the movie. This is the type of movie you do need to see on a big screen, and I totally acknowledge that. So I'm going to break this review up into chunks. I'm going to look at it first just sort of as a Marvel film, although it's hard to take the representation part out of it, but as a Marvel film, if you are a fan of the MCU, I think you're really going to enjoy this. I think this is one of the better origin films we've had in a long time. It also kind of feels like it can stand alone a little bit, which I think is nice, because we've had however many 10 plus years of overwhelming interwoven things. And so to be able to reset and take a step back and just, it's not in your face like, hey, you're a dum-dum origin story. I actually really appreciate the way that it trusted its audience to be like, you're a smart cookie. You can pick up on things. You're going to figure out a lot of this origin stuff. Yes, there are things that will be enhanced if you have a knowledge of the existing MCU. And I think after Shang-Chi and maybe Eternals and a couple other films, we're going to go back to that state where you have to have seen, the last 10 movies. But Shang-Chi, it's not standalone, but it has a healthy plot and life of its own that you could get into even if you are not super, super immersed in the MCU. I do think it also benefits from the fact that we haven't had an origin story like this in a while. It's a little templated. I think honestly all of the superhero origin stories have to be a little bit templated. There's just, that's what the source material is, right? But I think Black Widow was an interesting sort of in-between one where we knew so much about the character already that there wasn't that much they could give us in the origin story. And so it was sort of an origin / side tangent story adventure that happened during the everything else going on in the MCU events, whereas this feels truly like an origin story. And I think it is one of my favorite ones. I think another favorite of mine is maybe something like Ant-Man, and I gravitate towards the slightly more comedic Marvel films, and I was surprised at how much comedy there is in this one. And it's not beat you over the head with it comedy, but the fact that they've got Simu Liu in it, who was on Kim's Convenience and has those comedy chops. They've got Awkwafina, who's absolutely a comedian at heart. You've got Ronny Chieng, who's also a comedian. You've got these comedic elements, but the film doesn't push that too far and isn't too over the top with it. I think it's just a really nice balance of it. The action is very cool. It's distinct. It's still a CG extravaganza, but I think what truly sets Shang-Chi apart from a lot of the other Marvel films is it addresses a problem that a lot of Marvel films, and in fact a lot of superhero films, I would say, have in general, in that the thing or person or whatever it is that opposes the hero is usually a faceless, nameless creature that has motivations that are just destroy everything or whatever it is. Or they just end up being this one-dimensional throwaway nemesis who doesn't come back. No, Shang-Chi doesn't have that. Shang-Chi has a fully formed character that we understand their motivations, we understand their backstory, we may not approve of their methodology, but we are given a glimpse into their inner workings, and so well performed by Tony Leung. I can't speak highly enough. He stole the show for me in many senses, and I think this is what makes a great superhero film, is the forces of good and evil is so reductive, but the forces of things that we generally can approve of, and then the forces of things that maybe deep down we agree with them, but we don't agree with their methodology, right? Or just we understand where they're coming from in the deepest, darkest places of our souls. And I don't think I've seen I can't think of another word for villain, anti-hero performance this captivating since the Thor and early Avengers version of Loki, where you really did understand where that character was coming from, and they had motivation, and they showed it on screen, and it made sense. Yes, so early Loki, who I do think is the greatest villain in the MCU that we've seen to date, definitely being challenged by Tony Leung here, and what a performance. So as a Marvel film, as just a superhero film, I think it's really, really fun. It's funny. It has great action sequences. It clearly takes a lot of its influence from like the Hong Kong style martial arts. So just be prepared for that type of influence where you've got both this sort of CG factor and then you've got that sort of stylized action also happening, which might take a little bit to get used to if you're not familiar with it. it. But if you're inspired by this film, I would definitely say go and watch any and all of the classic Hong Kong style martial arts films. You'll see some amazing action there. Again, I can't speak highly enough of the cast. Everyone was doing the work. Again, Simu Liu, Awkwafina, Meng'er Zhang, Fala Chen, Benedict Wong, Ronny Chieng, Michelle Yeoh, and Tony Leung. Like, come on, you can't ask for a lot more than that. That's not true. You can ask for plenty more than that, and I will be asking for more than that in however many sequels they will give me, because I want sequels. Now, that's something I say often. So, from just that perspective, was grateful that it was just an enjoyable Marvel film. Now, let's put on our representation caps. As someone of Asian descent, anytime a film like this comes out, there's just so much stress on it, because if this fails, then suddenly the next 10 projects that were going to star Asian leads or Asian American and, Asian Canadian leads all get shelved because they blame the race thing up front. And I don't think that's fair. Same issue happens with female-led projects, right? I felt a similar stress when Wonder Woman came out, because if that failed, there probably went all of our female superhero films. Thankfully, that was really enjoyable. So we keep getting them. And as I said in the beginning, Crazy Rich Asians was the last time in theaters that I felt this sort of level of stress. I was once again so relieved at this film. Clearly, it is written by people who are of Asian, and not just Asian American descent, because there is a huge distinction between the Asian of Asia characters and then the Americanized Asians. And there were so many micro moments that I was just like, yes, I get this. I have lived through this moment. It's something that maybe if you come from a different culture will still be a valuable character moment to you. But if you are someone who lived through it, just the pressures of having Asian parents and achieving, but that's a whole plot in the film, which kind of makes sense given the plot they have set up. But just the pressures of achieving, the jokes of you can't have platonic friends, everybody's a possible relationship, the gender dynamics of having sons versus having daughters, which is a huge factor in this film as well, which I really appreciated. There was just so many moments that made it very clear that there was a genuine understanding of the Asian American experience that went into this. And I truly think that has to do with having a director/screenwriter and one of the other screenwriters who are Asian American. And it is interesting, Destin Daniel Cretton, who is the director of this, is Japanese American, but clearly captured a lot of the Chinese American experience. And so either that or there are things that transcend culture. And that's absolutely true. I know for a fact, because some of my other friends who are of different Asian backgrounds than I am, we all have a commonality in some of these things that I'm referring to. But just I teared up when the movie started because a lot of it is in Mandarin, and I just felt so seen in this film. It also doesn't hurt that the film takes place some of the time in San Francisco, which is where I'm from, and so much of it felt so authentic, even though it's taking place in this fantastical world. There are still moments in it that I'm like, okay, this is sort of a broader representation, and I would say that applies not just to the, race representation here, but just the plot representation. There are a couple things that I'm like, yes, these are the same sort of things I expect from other Marvel films, and you can't hold this one to a different standard because it's a Marvel film. You go into it knowing what you're going to expect, and this one, I knew what I was expecting and was still pleasantly surprised. So please actually go see this in theaters. Be safe about it. Be careful. Be vaccinated. Be masked. But it was just so enjoyable to see in theaters on a screen. And also just the fact that the majority of the cast I cannot recall, there's one character who's white, but they're like a side background character. I didn't see a ton of white characters in this, and it was just such a refreshing, odd experience for me to look like the characters who are on screen. And look, if you're going to complain about, you're leaving out white people or whatever it is, hey, you have almost every single other superhero film. You're doing fine. There's plenty of you. Let us have this as well. It's not exclusionary of white characters, but it's just like, yeah, this is a story that takes place in a certain community, and the authenticity is there. And I loved feeling like I could have been a part of that world from that perspective. And then also, I love this movie for the same reason I love all Marvel superhero films, just the action, fighting, fantastic moments, storytelling, legendary things. And go see this film in theaters. It's not a perfect movie, and I don't think any film is ever perfect, but in terms of experiences and joy at the movies and just big blockbuster extravaganza, this is absolutely a 5 out of 5 for me. And then the other film I have this week, and I'm loath to review it in the same week as Shang-Chi, is Cinderella. And I'm loath just because Shang-Chi had me on such a high. I was so happy about it. It was just such a delightful film to watch. I've been thinking about it since. And then there's Cinderella on Amazon and technically also out in theaters. And for every reason that I felt like Shang-Chi was made for me, I feel like Cinderella is not made for me, but I'm also not sure who Cinderella is made for. So it's the story of Cinderella, which I think most people are familiar with at this point in time. It stars Camila Cabello, Idina Menzel, Billy Porter, Nicholas Galitzine, Minnie Driver, and Pierce Brosnan. And this film was trying so desperately hard to feel modern and feminist, I think, and empowered, but at the same time, it completely undermined itself time after time. And oh my God, it was so painful to watch. It's a musical, but it's one of those musicals where they try and it's a jukebox musical where they take modern songs and they make them quasi-relevant to the plot using the visuals and all that stuff. And it was so painful to watch. I know Camila Cabello is a singer, and no shade to her whatsoever, but she is not the best at acting while singing. And that is something you need to be able to do for close-ups in a movie. Now, on stage, you might be able to be more broad or get away with certain things, but when you're in a movie musical, your close-up acting matters, and she just did not have the chops for it. She can sing. I'm sure she can sing. I'm pretty sure she can sing. And she was certainly trying her hardest, but when she's the one carrying the film, it's really painful. And then it's also very confusing because then you've got Idina Menzel, legend of stage and screen. You've got Billy Porter, legend of stage and screen. They are doing a great job. So if you know that you need people like that in this film, why don't you cast a main character who can do that work? And then the guy who plays the prince in it, the Nicholas kid, I don't know where he's from, he's fine, but he cannot sing. I don't think Minnie Driver and Pierce Brosnan can sing at all. I don't know if it was their voices or not their voices, but it was painful. It was so painful. There are so many moments that I was just like, please make it stop. Like, why didn't you dub this? What do Minnie Driver and Pierce Brosnan have over the makers of this film that they were like, you're going to let me sing in this? I just don't understand. And it was so brutal to watch because, again, so it's taking the story of Cinderella and then it's trying to modernize it in some senses. And there's this whole thing about her not wanting a prince, but she wants to, get a job and make money on her own. And we should look down upon that, which, okay, this, I get the message that you're trying to say. I'm fully supportive of the idea that women should have jobs, but the setting and the time and the place that they've done it just felt all jammed together. And then I complain a lot, especially on like roundtable discussions, about how a lot of the films we see recently don't feel like they take place on a set. They feel like they're completely in front of a green screen. Shang-Chi is something that I think is kind of in both worlds, just because so much of it is fantastical. But I would say something like Jungle Cruise is an example of a film where there's clearly a lot of budget spent, but almost no practical sets. This film, Cinderella, seems like it was made probably somewhere in Eastern Europe and it had actual sets, but everything felt super cheap. There's this whole plot line about how Cinderella actually wants to sell her dress designs. The dress designs look just tacky and cheap, and just the whole world looks tacky and cheap, and I don't understand because they're clearly in a real world setting. So why it's attention to detail, but more importantly than that, it's the plot, it's the performances. It was tough. It was a tough pill to swallow. We've seen so many better adaptations of Cinderella. We've seen so many better modernizations of Cinderella where you do have a pro-feminist version of her. I would say Ever After is a great example of it. Also, if you want an example of a jukebox musical-esque Cinderella adaptation, watch Ella Enchanted, which also stars Minnie Driver. So it just felt like they were ripping off Ella Enchanted most of the time. I could not find a particularly redeeming thing about this film. I feel very bad about saying that, but it was just painful to watch. And I mostly watched this because Billy Porter's in it, and I love Billy Porter, and I was just like, I will watch him in almost anything. It was brutal. It was so painful. I was just, like, clearly they spent time on his sequence, and then it was like they had him for like 2 days at the most. So they spent a bunch of time and effort on that, and then they're like, peace out, and just phoned the rest of the script in. Like, even visually, those moments, there's this huge VFX sequence. Billy Porter plays the fairy godmother, and there's a huge transformation sequence. This is in trailers and stuff, so I don't feel bad about talking about it. You can, I'm like, oh, okay, this is where all your production budget went for this, because you knew this was the moment. This is how you were going to trick people like me into possibly watching it, because they're like, Billy Porter would be in this. All right, I'll watch it. I'm sad to not be able to support it, but I really did not enjoy watching this film. It's not for me. Maybe if you're like a little kid, or not super little, but maybe there are children who might enjoy this. But I think There are better versions of it, as I said, Ever After or Ella Enchanted. Much more enjoyable, much more chemistry also between everybody involved. I get that there's a princess thing that happens in this with the two, the prince and Cinderella, and I just felt like there was nothing there whatsoever. So I am only going to give this 1.5 out of 5.